Hi everyone, thank you for coming to my session today. My name is Ivy Lee. I'm currently a designer at Google Brand Studio. I also taught advanced typography at Parsons. Let's get started.
Today, I'll go through some of my personal projects and research on design and typography around factory workers in China, and how social cultural stratification constitutes to a vernacular visual landscape and aesthetic decisions, and also the physical, cultural, and economic distance between production and consumption. I wanted to start with the assumption that the majority of us here today own at least one or two products from Apple. And in case you haven't noticed, on most of the Apple products, you'll see the following line of text somewhere. Designed by Apple in California, assembled in China. And as you may or may not know, Chinese workers at Foxconn factories pretty much assemble every iPhone in the world, along with other Apple products. So it's clear that the global supply chain involves a pretty long distance. This distance between designers, manufacturers, and consumers is first of all geographical. California, China, and Apple users around the world. But what's implied in this language is not only the geographical distance, it's also a distance of language, culture, economy, and class. The text on the product is written in a language that its makers do not speak. It's an expensive product that's not easily affordable by its makers. It has to be properly designed in California, a product of the high technology ethos of Silicon Valley, to justify the fact that it's assembled in China, the world's factory of cheap products. Because there is certain presumption about products made in China, and we all know what it is, right? Whether those presumptions are grounded or not, there is one thing we can be sure of. If the geographical distance between production and consumption is something we can bridge, it's a lot harder to bridge the cultural, economic, and class differences. Now, I want to read you a poem. It's a poem written by a female worker in China, and her name is Wu Xia. In the brightly lit packing workshop, the iron I'm holding carries the warmth of my palm. I shall first press flat the shoulder straps, so that they are soft enough for a delicate skin. Then to the waistline, such a lovely waistline, made for a loving, gentle hand, for a shaded parkway to be the witness of a romance. And finally, I shall spread out the dress and press each pleat into even width, so that you may wait for a soft breeze by the lake on a meadow. Run as you wish, but remember to let the pleats swing in the shape of an arc, like a petal of a flower. As for me, I'm done with my shift and about to go home to wash my uniform soaked with sweat. And the dress I folded, packed, will be shipped out of the factory to a mall, to a boutique, in afternoon or evening, waiting just for you, the girl who I don't know but love dearly. I found this poem extremely touching and wanted to translate it into English and share with you all. As Wu Xia works in a garment factory doing repetitive labor, with her life confined at one end of the supply chain, she doesn't stop imagining the life at the other end. The life of the girl of the similar age as her, who bought the dress she made and who is able to fully enjoy the beauty and love of life. When we get hold of a product, it's easy to forget that there are a lot of people behind it who made it possible. through designing it, making it, packing it, transporting it, selling it, and shipping it. Even as designers who seem to know more about the physicality of things than some others, we usually stand at the consumer end of the supply chain and know next to nothing of how products are made and by whom they're made. In order to better understand the production end, I went to work for 2 weeks in a garment factory in China. My experience in the factory was brief. However, the constant noise, the pain from working and standing for long hours, the lack of sleep, the tedious and repetitive labor, the distance from home, the laughter and complaints illustrate a life that's different and yet similar from my everyday experience as a designer, living away from my home country. This is a video I made from the images I collected during my factory research, and it's played with the sound recorded when I was working in the factory. What intrigues me the most is the language and typography appear around factories. What's the visual and textual language around industrial spaces in China? How does the language speak about the absurdity in the living and working conditions of the low-wage workforce? Factories in China are usually built in the rural urban fringe areas, where most workers would live. Therefore, the visual landscape here is largely in alignment with the economic level of those fringe areas, and the content of the visual landscape is determined by the survival needs of the residents. People who live there probably couldn't care less about graphic design, but they still have the needs to produce flyers, posters, and scrolling LEDs for job postings, and for storefronts and prints for eateries, lodging places, clothing shops, and other basic needs. There are also covered ads for prostitution, abortion, and fake IDs, and government slogans, mostly to tell the residents not to commit crimes, beware of the frauds, and don't sell out their national IDs for quick money. These living needs determine the visual landscape and design decisions. Type is set in default fonts, scaled up, underlined, outlined, colored, highlighted, and sometimes all at once in order to catch your attention. And type is often stretched and has minimal leading and pretty much no margin to fit in as much text as possible. And the carelessly placed typography and contrasting colors are the major formal elements being used. As long as information is conveyed, there's no need for imagery and drawings. One of the only exceptions will probably be the prostitution business, where visual seduction of female body is clearly they're not the best design in the world, but I'm fascinated by their truthfulness in how they reveal about the environment and the living conditions of the factory workers. following their design decisions, or the complete lack of design decisions. I started to create graphic elements that borrow the form and content of the factory environment. I try to commit as many type crimes as possible. I use both English and Chinese in those graphics, but it's not necessarily a one-to-one translation. Here in the work, English is used in an inaccurate manner and sometimes intentionally mistranslated to amplify the confusion. Mistranslation, no translation, and grammar mistakes are part of the work in order to imitate the lack of mutual understanding and the language gap between production and consumption. The final outcome of this project is an exhibition called On Being a Factory Worker. It aims to bring forward the disordered but lively visual landscape surrounding Chinese factory workers. The exhibition is designed to be anti-designed through a vibrant, clashing color palette and a joyful, messy, and overloaded usage of typography. An essential part of this exhibition is a two-way mural that reflects the print from the wall, while simultaneously displaying a video about high-end products made in China. The two-way mural further reveals the socio-economic disparities between the producers and consumers. Looking into the mirror, the viewers would also see themselves reflected in the artwork and perhaps to think about their life situations in relation to factory workers. My friends and I worked together to we-paste hundreds of pieces of paper onto the gallery wall from floor to ceiling, while intentionally leaving the tools used in the production on site, making this exhibition both a tribute to the labor and a documentation of it. As designers, artists, and especially those who are away from home, we're repetitively making through our physical labor and often underpaid and overworked and miscommunicated, misrepresented, or mistranslated. The more I research on factory workers, the more I find myself not too different from them. As an essential part of the global economy, we all perform our tasks to keep the world moving. And sometimes it's probably necessary to take a look at what people are doing at the other side of the world and at the other end of the supply chain. This page summarizes the major theoretical foundation of my research. The Consumer Society by Jean Baudrillard lays out the theoretical structure of consumerism, and Made in China is a field study about women factory workers in China by anthropologist Pang Nine. And Techno-Mobility in China by Carol Wallace talks about the labor migration in the digital age. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.